As you watch this teaching, I would like to ask you to please subscribe, like, and comment so more people can see it.
Welcome to Home Group. My name is Rick Renner, and tonight I'm here with Joel Renner, Paul Renner, and Denise Renner. Hey guys, welcome to Home Group.
Thank you, Rick. Home Group, welcome. We are having the best time with you talking about what God has done in our story. But I know you have a story, and your story is very, very important. And don't ever forget what God has done in your life.
Amen.
Because it encourages you and strengthens you. And He's the same yesterday and today and forever. So if He's done miracles in your life before, then He's the same miracle worker today.
And the book of Psalms says we are to remember the works of the Lord. And that's really what we're doing. Joel, what did you want to say?
I was going to say Mama's jacket looks beautiful, first of all.
Thanks, Joel.
The second thing, Mama, I remember you have a little teaching about, it's wonderful, that it's not the end of your story. And if you haven't heard that, you should look it up, but it's very good. I enjoyed it immensely.
Thanks, Joel.
But before I introduce Paul, I want to tell you that we're offering you our whole series this week free. And it's not just a series, it is really a documentary. Joel, you were talking about that before.
Oh yeah, it's like a lifetime documentary. It has photos, videos. There's a real story in it. It's fun, a lot of fun.
It's 10 parts and it's free, and we want you to have it. So just contact us, we'll get it right to you. Yes, Joel?
This home group's very different. It's fun. You can really feel the family, feel the stories and our spirits. But the TV program, that series, really documents everything. And I think it's a blast.
It's really amazing what we filmed and documented. We have it all right here. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's free. Just go to renner.org to order it, or call us 1-800-742-5593, and be sure to order the book. Please order this book. I'm not trying to sell you a book. I'm trying to get you something that will really help you. You've been chosen by God. This book will show you God really did point His finger at you. He's got His finger pointed at you right now. He's waiting for you to say yes. You've been chosen by Him. He has something special for you to do. But now we have to introduce Paul Renner because he has something for show and tell. Paul, what is it?
All right, show and tell. We like to do this. So today I have a camera for you. Now, this is not just any camera. This is the camera that we mentioned in yesterday's home group, a home video camera that the very first TV programs were filmed on. And a few years ago, I think it was for your birthday or for the church celebration.
I can't remember why.
We had a member church that actually filmed on this camera the very first program, and he had saved the camera for years. And before he moved from Moscow, he gave me the camera, and so we presented to Mom and Dad in this wonderful case, and it's a piece of our history now.
He really had the sense that that camera was a piece of history.
Yes.
Because the first Christian TV programs for the Soviet Union were filmed on that very camera.
Yes, and if Volodya and Anya, if you're watching, thank you so much.
Thank you, Volodya.
Everything that you have done over the years.
And today, when we walk into our TV office, that's hanging on the walls of our ministry. But with that camera, which is just a simple home video camera, but believe me, in the Soviet Union, that was really high tech.
This camera even has buttons that don't exist on cameras anymore.
But we began to film our TV ministry on that very camera, and we began traveling all over the former Soviet Union to sit down with communist deputies to negotiate for TV time. Most of them had never heard anybody speak English. They had never met an American, and they had never heard of anybody buying time because all the time belonged to the government. There was no such thing as capitalism. But I walked out of those offices with friends that were communist leaders. And like all the fear of the Soviet Union just began to evaporate, just melted away. I saw these were marvelous people. They just didn't know God. But their hearts were wide open. And I came home from that first negotiation trip with contracts to reach more than 20 million people. Is that amazing?
Amazing.
But in the midst of all this, we also started the Riga Good News Church. And we started the Riga Good News Church, well, we were going to start it at the Riga Kino Theater, which is the big central movie theater.
Historical building.
But the prime minister of the new country, the prime minister, took a stand against me. Now, I hear a lot of pastors say that they have problems with local authorities. I don't know many pastors who've had a prime minister stand against them. The prime minister of the nation said he would stop us. So that local theater was across the street from the prime minister's office. So they could not work with us. So we began looking for another building, and
This was Easter Sunday.
we were going to start the church on Easter Sunday, and it was the first Easter. You guys think about that. It was the first Easter in the Republic of Latvia. Easter had been illegal for 55 years. Well, we found an auditorium in the Academy of Sciences. It was a round auditorium. It could not have felt more communist. You just walked in there and felt like you walked into the Soviet Union.
Wood paneling, red carpet, red chairs, and a barrelief of Marx and Engels.
And the Soviet Union,
Yes.
big emblem of the Soviet Union, big Soviet stars all the way around the building, massive chandeliers. The whole building felt like it had been built by Stalin, and it had. It was a Stalin building. And that's where we gave birth to our church in 1993. Is that amazing?
Yes.
That is amazing. And God showed up in that communist auditorium with signs and wonders. But I knew that if we were going to have a long-term life as a church, we had to have our own building. Everything was so unstable. Hey, friends, I'm telling you, I could not have moved my family into anything more unstable. No one knew whether the freedom was real or just a farce. No one knew if the Soviet Union was going to return. We didn't even know what kind of money we had. People had lost their passports because the Soviet Union evaporated. So just imagine if you woke up tomorrow and there was no United States, all your documents would be worth nothing. What if tomorrow you woke up and the United States disappeared and now you had no national anthem?
No national anthem, no national bank, no national currency, no passport. Your driver's license didn't mean anything anymore.
Everything disappeared. And people quickly were making a grab for land because all the land had been nationalized by the Soviet Union. If you've ever seen the old movie Dr. Zhivago, there's a scene where Dr. Zhivago returns to his house and all kinds of people are living in his house in different rooms of his house. That's what happened all over the Soviet Union. Everything private became nationalized, so nobody owned anything. So now the Soviet Union collapsed. It was 1993. People are making a grab for land. They're trying to reclaim what was once theirs. I cannot even begin to tell you how confusing a period it was. And because capitalism was just trying to be born, nobody knew what was normal prices. So there was price gouging like you cannot begin to imagine. And because people didn't know what things should cost, they thought these were normal price. There was nothing normal about it at all. It was outrageous. And the mafia was everywhere. Am I exaggerating, guys?
Not at all.
In fact, even now, when people look back on that period and they talk about the 90s, what do they say, Paul?
They say it's amazing you could even survive the 90s. And today when somebody says, oh, life is so hard, I said, wait a minute, I think you're forgetting the 90s.
You could have been killed easily for $100 back at that time because that was such big money.
We had a church member in Riga whose son was killed for his ring. He was killed and his finger was cut off and they stole his ring. And he was killed for his ring.
It was just the wild, wild west. I mean, that's just where we were living. And you know what? There was such a grace on us. We were just having a blast the whole time. Every day was fun. Every day was an adventure. God was with us. But I knew we needed to have a church building if we were going to have a permanent church. Well, how do you buy land when nobody owns land? Everything was nationalized. So even to find a piece of land that was buyable was very difficult. Well, we finally found a piece of land, and guess what it was? It was a massive swamp. That's all that was available to buy. You couldn't buy anything else. It was a swamp. But we bought it, and guess what it was? It was on one side of the forest where all the Jews were exterminated by the Nazis. You could just walk through the forest to where the Jews were exterminated. That's where we eventually built our church. And we began to build. Oh, my goodness. Well, I look back on it, I think, man, we must have been crazy to do what we were doing, or we had a word from God, and we had a word from God. Nobody had built a new church building in that city for 55 years. It made such news when we decided to build the building that the chief architect of the nation called a convocation of all the architects from the whole nation. And they all met in Riga and demanded that I come to give a report about what I wanted to do. And I sat and listened for hours as all these architects talked among themselves and said, what should a church look like? None of us have ever seen a church built in our generation. Well, if you build a church, does it have to be a cathedral? What does a modern church look like? Does it have to have a steeple? If it has a steeple, does it have to have bells? If it has bells, can they be plastic or do they have to be real bells? Can they be computerized? Well, that was a funny conversation because there were no computers. This big debate about what should a church look like, I sat there thinking, these are the top architects of the nation. None of them have a clue what a church should look like. That's when it really hit me again. We are really paving territory that nobody's ever paved. Isn't that amazing?
And back in those days, there wasn't very much construction in Riga at all.
Well, there were no materials. That was another problem when we began to build our building because there were no materials. Latvia put up borders. Well, most materials came from Russia. Well, when suddenly your country puts up borders and you have no infrastructure, it means you have no goods. There was no sheetrock, there was no plaster, there was no wood, there were no nails, there were no pipes, there were no faucets, there were no sinks, there were no toilets, there was nothing. So I began to travel with Andrei Chobother. We went to Poland to see what kind of goods we could find in Poland. Then we went to Scandinavia to see what we could find in Scandinavia. Then we tried to see if we could get something across the border from Russia. It was impossible to build because there were no materials and there wasn't even any steel to build a building. So we came up with the idea to order all the steel from building from Tennessee. Tennessee? Excuse me. This was the Soviet Union. This was Latvia. We ordered our entire steel for our building clear over in America because there wasn't any steel where we were and we couldn't get it from Russia. You guys think about that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Finally, the steel is on a ship headed to us. And I get a phone call. Somebody high up in that government has decided they will not let us receive the steel. They want to stop what we are doing. Well, what are we supposed to do? Call the ship and tell them to turn around and go back to Tennessee? It was already in the middle of the Atlantic on the way to us. I was sitting in my office at our house crying, saying, Lord, I'm doing everything I know to obey you. Lord, what am I going to do about this steel? What am I going to do? They won't let me receive it. It's on the ship. It's almost here. And my phone rang. And it was the U.S. consul. There was not an ambassador. And he said, Mr. Renner, I'm new. I just have arrived, and I need to ask you some questions because you've been here longer than anybody else. As an American, I need to ask you some historical questions about what you and your family experienced when you first moved here in 1991, 92. So I began to answer his questions. He said, thank you, you've been such a blessing to me. He said, now what can I do for you? I said, well, we have this little issue with steel on a ship. They're not going to let me receive it. And he said, Mr. Renner, your problem just became my problem. I'll help you out. A few days later, he called me. Riga was so little in those days. The U.S. consul said, meet me on such and streets downtown. Just me and him and Andre. And together we walked to that particular department in the government that stopped us. He made an appointment. We walked in together. We sat at the table, and I could see those officials were trembling. Well, Latvia was just emerging, had no money, had no infrastructure, was terrified to breathe, to move, terrified of foreigners, terrified the Soviet Union was going to come back, and Latvia was being propped up with money from America. And the U.S. consul said, I understand that you're not going to let Mr. Renner receive his medal. If you do not permit him to receive his medal, I'm here to tell you, you will lose all of your financial funding from the United States. Gone. The official from the government looked at me and said, Mr. Renner, of course you can receive your medal, and what else can we do for you? Just like that, everything turned around. The medal showed up. I kissed it when it showed up. Mm-hmm. I opened the doors to those containers and I kissed that medal. I said, welcome, we've been waiting for you. And we began to construct that building, which to this very day is occupied by God's people. Is that amazing?
Just amazing. How many containers was it?
55 containers.
55 containers.
55 containers. You know, I know people that have received a container. 55 containers showed up on one ship.
And before you had that appointment with the ambassador, Latvia had declared that you were number one
Contraband. They said I was the number one contrabandist in the country because I was trying to sneak 55 containers into the country. How do you sneak 55 containers into a country? They just were determined to stop me, but God turned it around. And God will turn anything around for you. Don't give up. You might think that you're facing an impossible situation. God can turn it around for you. And we moved into that building debt-free. Mm-hmm. Is that amazing, guys?
It's amazing.
It's amazing. And while we were building the building, we were also continuing to travel to do the TV ministry, negotiating for TV time in Ukraine, Channel 1 for Belarus, all over the former Soviet Union. I traveled to every nook and cranny of the Soviet Union on planes, trains, and automobiles. Back in the day when you never knew if a plane had enough fuel to get you where you were supposed to go. I had many times when the plane would fly halfway to a destination and stop midstream, land and say, we don't have fuel to go any further. And we would get off the train and have to figure out, off the plane, and have to figure out how we're going to get from there to where we needed to go to negotiate for TV time. I am not exaggerating. And there were no banks. Is that the truth?
It's the truth.
There were no banks, so you couldn't wire anything to anybody. You had to carry cash everywhere you went. And there was no good postal system, so when we began to produce TV programs and broadcast for us and for others, we had to take all the programs. Back on those days, they were
VHS tapes.
Super VHS tapes. We would put them in big duffel bags, and we had a group of couriers.
For you that don't know what that is, they're about this big and then they're about this thick. Each one of them had a 30-minute program on it.
Well, more than one. They had multiple. But each courier would go to a whole bunch of stations. They would carry duffel bags of tapes. They would carry all the TV money because you couldn't wire anything. And remember, these were the days when you could be killed for $100. I mean, it's really the grace of God that none of our people were killed. But you know what? Everybody was excited. Even though everybody knew it was dangerous, every one of those couriers knew this was the moment in history they had waited for, and they were willing to give their lives for what they were doing.
And many of them spent 20 to 25 days a month traveling.
Usually, the average was 3 months. They would travel 3 months by train, deliver all the programs, deliver all the money, get home. Usually they'd be home 1 week. We'd give them the next duffel bag full of tapes.
You meant 3 weeks.
Three
weeks.
yeah,
You said 3 months. So, yeah,
So, 3 weeks. And then they'd come home for a week and they'd start all over again. They were living their lives on those trains. And guys, several of those couriers today are leaders in our ministry. They're still with us, been with us for all of these years. And God enabled us to construct the first TV network of stations to broadcast the teaching of the Bible all over the Soviet Union. And Joel said in yesterday's program that we stopped counting the mail by the pieces. We started counting by the tons and tons and tons of mail
And we had to answer all of them by hand.
because we had no computers.
You had to write the answer. You couldn't type the answer. You had to write out the answer or response.
There were no computers. In fact, when we finally got computers in our office in Jelgava, we were the first office in the whole city to have computers. The city leaders came to our building to see our computers, which were
Old Macintoshes.
old desktop Macintoshes. They had never seen computers. In fact, in those days, if you went to the store to buy something, there weren't calculators. There were no cash registers. It was abacus. You know what an abacus is? Abacus is where they have those beads that slide back and forth. That's the way all the cashiers counted what you owed and how they would determine your change. I don't know about you, Denise, but I can remember looking at them. Those women were like masters with those abacus.
Yes.
It was shocking to
It's
me.
like, how do they even figure out anything?
I would want to pay them again just so I could watch them do that. Like, could you please do that again?
You know what always struck me? How do you know they calculated right? If you don't know how to
I don't know if they calculated right.
If you don't know how to run an abacus, how do you know if they did
Yeah.
it right to you?
But do you know people were so honest in the Soviet
Yeah.
Union? They were so honest that if you overpaid,
Yeah.
they would chase you down the street
To give you your change.
to give you your change. People were, you know, when people suffer, they really care about each other. There was such a caring and a love for each other. People were just so honest back in those days. But we began traveling by plane, train, and automobile. We were building the church, and something else happened. I started our Pastors Association. Because pastors were watching the TV program, the Lord told us to take Sunday school to the whole Soviet Union. Hey friends, churches were just starting. There were no churches, except there were underground churches. Underground churches. And the underground church paid a serious price for their faith. But now churches were starting new churches. There were not a lot of underground churches. Public churches were just starting for the first time, and pastors had no Bible education. They didn't have any Bible education, so they watched me. They watched, actually at that time, it was just me on television. Then we brought Brother Copeland, then we brought Joyce Meyer, then we brought Marilyn Hickey and a few others that we began broadcasting. The impact of all those programs was enormous, but because people were watching me teach the Bible verse by verse, they wanted me to teach them how to pastor their churches. And so we started what was called the Good News Association of Pastors and Churches. And God enabled us, with the help of our partners, to hold massive conferences
And support pastors.
and support pastors. The amount of money that God channeled through our ministry to support those pastors and those churches is mind-boggling. We would have conferences where 400, 500, 600, 700 pastors would come, paid for all their rooms, paid for their transportation because they had no money. They had no money. Gave them Bibles, gave them gifts, gave them books, gave them VHS tapes, gave them VCRs and
DVDs and DVD players.
Oh, gave them everything they needed so that when they got home, they could have their own home school, Bible school. It's just amazing. All these things were happening simultaneously.
A few years ago, I was at a funeral of a pastor who was with us from the very, very beginning. And when I was in his home, in his living room, he had a collection of the first video club
Wow.
tapes that you filmed,
Wow.
along with the other photos and notebooks that he had taken, notes that he had taken from conferences.
I don't even have those old video club.
Yeah.
I'd love to have those. That would be,
They were green.
could add that to our souvenir,
Yeah.
to our museum.
Yeah.
But finally we dedicated the church. What an event. Kenneth and Gloria came, Joyce and Dave came, Meyer, Marilyn Hickey and Wally came, Bob Yandian came, Rob Thompson came, so many people came, Phil Driscoll came. We had quite a time. And the day that we dedicated the building, I stood up to speak. I'm looking out in that crowd that is packed. Do you guys remember how packed it was?
Yes. Oh, the bottom, the balcony, everything.
Because nobody had ever seen a church dedicated.
Oh, yeah. It was
Nobody had ever witnessed such a
a
thing.
lot of people there.
So they came from all over the Baltic states. And when I stood up, There's Denise standing by my side. I'm getting ready to speak, so she's going to sit down. On the front row is my associate sitting next to his new wife. And just before I spoke, the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, job done. Give this church to your associate, move to Moscow, and do it again. Right before I preached, that's what I heard. Give it to him? Give it to Andre and move to Moscow and do it again? Well, I always knew we'd end up in Moscow. I knew that because I'd had that vision years earlier. But the whole time I preached, I kept looking at him thinking, we have done all this work, and now the Lord's telling me to give it to him and move to Moscow and do it again. But that was the mandate from the Lord, and that's what we did. But look what our TV producer just gave us. Look.
It's one of the VHS tapes that we sent to all the pastors to learn the Bible, to learn how to be a pastor and how to teach in their own churches. And you know what he brought me? It's called How to Survive Difficult Situations.
What, is that what that's called?
Yes. So this is an example of one of the tapes that was sent to all these pastors and the associations.
Well, this whole casing is in English, so obviously we did this in English and Russian.
We did it in both. We took what we did in Russian, and we also made it available in English back in those days.
2 hours of teaching.
Wow.
Anyway, we were just doing everything we could to take the Bible school to the whole former Soviet Union.
That's what the Lord said. Take Sunday school to the whole Soviet Union. And guess what, dear Renners? We're doing the same thing today. We're believing for a revival of the Bible all over the world. Our call has never changed. We're basically sticking with our vision. But the day came when it was time for the Renners to move to Moscow. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, because when we moved to Moscow, things got really exciting. We understood everything to that moment was preparation for what was going to take place. When we finally relocated to Moscow, what a day that was. That was the year 2000. It was in August. We all got on a train together except for Philip. He was in the United States doing something else. He never came back to Latvia. But anyway, we'll get to the rest of the story tomorrow. It's going to be good. But hey, we want you to have the whole documentary called Unlikely, My Personal Testimony. It's 10 parts. You will love it. It's free. So just go online to Renner.org. You can get it. And be sure to order the book, Chosen by God. And if you need a prayer request, write to us, prayer@Renner.org, or call us 1-800-742-5593. And sleep well. And when we come back tomorrow night, we're going to continue our story. Bye-bye.
If that teaching helped you, would you please subscribe, like, and comment so more people can see it?